Hi, my name is Davin Sundvik with The Catch today, and we're going to be going over hunting story number 8 for me, which is going to be my second ever pronghorn tag, but this was a horn shorter than ears tag. In the state of Nevada, you got to wait a few years between hunts if you draw and kill a horns longer than ears pronghorn. So oftentimes what guys will do, just like me, is we'll put in for the horn shorter tags, which there's plenty of tags for an abundance of animals. And so I always want to start off the story kind of how we left off the previous one. So previously, my dad and I had kind of planned out on deer hunting on Area 17. We were very successful. But for horn shorter than ears tags, we didn't really see much rhyme or reason to start party tagging for these animals quite yet. And so we had just put in for our own tags for that. And because we all had experience finding our own animals, he drew a tag in his zone. My buddy drew a tag in a zone, and then I drew a tag in a completely different zone. So we had this big group chat full of guys that were out in the field hunting, and it was a pretty fun experience. However, I would say that looking back on it, I definitely would do some things a little bit differently. But at the time, I was living with a roommate. My roommate decided to go hunting with me. One of my buddies, two of my buddies ended up hunting together. My dad actually just ended up hunting solo. And both of those guys were successful on opening day. And then I was the last one to tag out the very first morning of the second day of pronghorn season. This was a pretty cool hunt for me because there was lots of scouting opportunities. I went scouting pretty much every weekend that I could because I only lived about an hour and 45 minutes away from the zone. So for me, it was a really easy day trip or even weekend hunt. And I was able to even take my little Toyota Corolla and drive through a lot of the dirt roads past there. So I learned quite a bit about the area along the way. I found some really cool spots where I knew that the antelope were going to be. On one of my scouting trips, I even found a buck, horns longer than ears, by a random wallow, or if you will, just an area where the spring is just kind of naturally bubbling up from the ground. I learned a lot about antelope behavior, even more so than my first hunt. And I'd found horns shorter than ears, just like randomly moving through the mountains and things like that. So I knew the zone had a lot of animals, and I knew the potential was high for success. So after hunting the first day, though, I realized that our initial strategy wasn't going to be as successful as I thought, right? We had found animals, but we actually found them one basin over than we were expecting. So it was a little bit interesting for us because there was a basin that had some water in it, but then there was another basin that was dry. And I think they were keying in on that basin for some bedding opportunities and some overgrown sagebrush that they like to bed in and hide in. And also, there was a lot of debris that had obviously washed through this wash previously, and some new growth had been growing out of it. So we had to adjust on that second day. So we had to kind of use that first day as a learning opportunity. And I actually did miss a couple of shots on the first day. I had taken a couple of pot shots, which, now as a hunter, I know a little bit more about my capabilities as far as my shooting goes. So instead, what we had decided was, okay, we're not gonna do any of that anymore. We're gonna switch it up. I'm gonna hunt with my Mosin gun, and we're just gonna get super close. And that evening, we had actually gotten close to a pronghorn. However, this is opening day. However, what we had kind of saw was, like he was kind of right on the edge. And we're like, man, is he longer? Is he shorter? And, with the light going down behind the mountains, it was still legal shooting. It was just a lot harder to see him than I had thought it would be. And so in the binos, we just kind of made that judgment call and said, yeah, he's probably just a little bit longer than yours. So we couldn't shoot that buck. But the next morning we had woken up, and all of a sudden, we see a buck walking around in the desert. He's kind of zigzagging toward our direction. And he's just feeding, and we're being calm. And we're in this little, like I said, it was a little like river drainage almost, where, the runoff, like a runoff drainage where it wasn't always flowing, but sometimes it would be flowing and sometimes it wouldn't be. And it had carved out like a canal in the desert pretty much. And it was about 6 feet deep, so we could walk straight up without anything seeing us or hearing us. And it really did kind of blend us into the terrain quite a bit. I think also there was a huge wind advantage being in there because I think the wind was staying in that canal, and it was because it was early in the morning. That thermal that blows downhill was blowing downhill and blowing our wind down towards the road. So, in case you don't know how thermals work, typically in the morning time, even if there's no wind, there's going to be a slight breeze that rolls downhill. That's what a thermal is in the morning. Now, you have an afternoon thermal, which is the exact opposite. It's when the sun hits the ground, and even if there's no wind at all, there'll be a slight breeze that goes uphill. So, got to understand thermals if you're going to get into big game hunting, particularly pronghorn, because they have very sensitive noses, very sensitive eyesight. So you got to be really still in order to get close. Well, anyway, we see this big buck. He's getting closer and closer and closer. And we're actually looking for other herds at this point because we knew that there was another horned shorter herd in the area, and we just didn't know where they were. So we're continuing to scout for that, and then all of a sudden we see a second buck with him, and both these bucks are walking very, very close. They're weaving in and out of the brush line, which is about 30 yards away from us, and they're further down the hill. But eventually they weave like right up to us at around 30 yards, and we're looking, and all of a sudden we see a tiny little buck with them. And so something that you can learn from this video is that pronghorn tend to travel in groups. If you see a pronghorn all by itself, it doesn't necessarily mean there are more nearby, but there is a good opportunity for them to be nearby. So make sure you're kind of cautious and sensitive to the fact that just because there's one doesn't mean there aren't more, right? So if you have a tag for horns longer, you have a tag for horns shorter, and you see one that's not shootable, sometimes there are bedded down pronghorn, or they're very small animals. So if they're behind a bunch of sagebrush, they could just be hiding from you. You just might not see them. And that was the case here. They're very short animals, and the smaller buck walks out of the brush, and all of a sudden we can see him. And so I take my Mosin Nagant, and I'm precariously sitting on this little, it's a really steep berm because like I said, the water just kind of carves out this little channel right in this basin here. And I'm aimed in, and I take a shot, and I see the pronghorn. They're all like not really running around, but they're all walking around and stomping their feet and just kind of riled up, like what the hell's going on here, right? And I was looking at that buck for quite a while because I wanted to make sure that the horns really were longer than the ears, and I was able to see in the scope when they feed, oftentimes their ear will flick forward, and then sometimes it'll flick back if they hear something. So when that ear moves, you can pretty obviously tell whether or not it's longer or shorter. And I knew this guy, the ears were longer than the horns, which is the type of tag that I had. And then all of a sudden I see him standing there, staring at me. And I'm like, man, like, what did I not hit him? And so I take a second shot at him, and he goes down. The other bucks eventually, run off. And we walk over to him. He's just not very far away from the road. And sure enough, horn shorter than ears, and we're measuring with a tape measure to double check and all that kind of stuff. And we're taking pictures, and it's all exciting stuff. And then we go to kind of, get him prepped up to bring him over to the vehicle. And then we notice that there's actually 2 entrance wounds and 2 exit wounds. So even on some of these smaller animals, just because you hit them double lung, or in the chest cavity does not mean that they die instantaneously. So that is something that you got to know when you're out there big game hunting. You got to kind of know how to read the animal's body language and determine what kind of a hit it was or a clean miss, because an animal does respond differently to a clean miss versus a marginal hit versus a lethal hit. And this was some of my first experiences without my dad present in order to get a big game animal. Actually, as a matter of fact, this was the very first big game animal that I had hunted without my dad present. So it was kind of a learning opportunity for me to have conversations with a wildlife biologist, friends who had scouted the area, and really kind of pick apart what I wanted to do in order to get better at hunting that zone. So I do appreciate you watching this video, and obviously subscribe and like this video if you want to watch more like these. But I make these mainly because of documentation purposes. So if you're interested in that, that's great. But mainly, if you're going to be getting advice from somebody on the internet, don't you want to know some of their hunting stories and see if their stories are in line with what you want to experience? So if that's something that you do want to experience, comment down below. That way I can make sure I can include details that are valuable to you. So that way, I'm not just rambling on here on camera without any rhyme or reason. Again, appreciate you. Have a great day.